I never thought one decision could shift the way my mother looked at me, the way she spoke to me, or the way she saw me altogether. It started quietly, like a secret I carried only within myself, hidden in whispers that never left my lips. For years, I felt something unspoken stirring inside me, something that made me pause whenever I looked at myself in the mirror. My reflection wasn't wrong exactly, it just wasn't complete. It was as if the glass showed the outline of a person, but the colors had yet to be painted in. Growing up, I had always been a little different. My mother noticed it in the small things, how I lingered near her vanity while she applied her makeup, how my eyes traced the way her dresses swayed when she walked, how I seemed more alive when I was surrounded by her clothes than when I was with my friends outside. She never scolded me for it. If anything, she offered small smiles, almost as if she understood something about me that I didn't have the courage to name. But when I reached my late teens, the pressure to be normal grew heavier. My friends talked about dating, about being strong, about fitting into roles I could never quite inhabit. I forced myself to laugh along, but inside, every chuckle felt hollow, every word felt borrowed. The truth was that I longed for something softer, something that aligned with the pulse I felt deep in my chest. That longing only grew louder until one day, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I remember the first time I researched hormones. My hands trembled on the keyboard, afraid that even typing the words would make them real. Estrogen for transition, I typed, and the search results unfolded like a door swinging open to a world I'd always sensed but never stepped into. My heart pounded as I read story after story of people who had taken that step, people who had embraced themselves in a way that terrified and exhilarated me. Their words spoke to me more deeply than anything else ever had. It wasn't an impulsive decision. I spent months reading, learning, questioning myself. I wanted to be certain that this was more than curiosity. Each night as I lay in bed, I replayed the idea in my mind. What if I woke up one day and my reflection finally matched the person inside me? What if my mother no longer saw me as her son, but something else, something truer? That thought scared me, but it also made my heart race with a kind of hope I hadn't felt in years. When the day finally came, when the pills rested in my palm for the first time, I felt like I was holding a secret too heavy for words. They looked so ordinary, tiny, unassuming, but to me they were everything. I swallowed them with a glass of water, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a surge of control, as if I had finally chosen myself. The changes didn't happen overnight. First, it was subtle. A softness in my skin, a gentleness in the way my body felt. My emotions, too, began to shift, no longer buried under layers of detachment, but alive and raw. I cried more easily, but I also laughed in ways that felt genuine. I began to recognize myself in the little details. The way my face looked softer in certain lighting, the way clothes I had once only dared to touch now seemed to belong to me. But the real test was my mother. She noticed before I ever said a word. She had always been observant, always paying attention to the quiet changes no one else caught. One evening, as we sat at the kitchen table, she tilted her head and studied me with a look that made me shift uncomfortably. "You've been different lately," she said softly. Not accusing, not harsh, just noticing. Froze. My heart beat so loudly I thought she could hear it. I wanted to deny it, to brush it off, but instead, the words spilled out before I could stop them. I started taking estrogen. The silence that followed stretched like a string pulled too tight. I stared at the table, unable to meet her eyes, expecting anger, disappointment, or confusion. But then, her voice broke the stillness. "I wondered when you'd finally say it." I looked up, stunned. She wasn't frowning. She wasn't upset. Her expression was something else. Something warm, almost relieved. "You've always been my child," she continued, her voice trembling slightly. "But now, I think I see the daughter I always knew was in you." Her words hit me harder than anything I'd ever felt. My throat tightened, tears spilling before I could catch them. To hear her say it, to be recognized in that way, it was overwhelming. That was the moment everything shifted. That was the moment son became daughter, not through force but through love. But if you think that was the end of my story, you're wrong. It was only the beginning. Because with every step forward, with every layer of myself I revealed, came new challenges, new fears, and new truths I never expected to face. And as my transformation deepened, so did the tension between who I was becoming, and how the world around me chose to see me. After that night at the kitchen table, my world felt like it had been flipped upside down. Not in a destructive way, but in a way that made me realize there was no going back. My mother's acceptance wasn't just comforting, it was liberating. She didn't simply tolerate what I had confessed, she embraced it. Yet, even with her support, the road ahead wasn't smooth. The first few weeks after telling her were a strange mix of quiet tenderness and unspoken tension. Some mornings, I'd catch her looking at me for a little too long, as if she was studying every detail, trying to connect the person sitting across from her with the little boy she once raised. I knew it wasn't easy for her, even if she was supportive. She had to shift decades of memories, reframe all the time she had called me her son, and slowly learn to call me her daughter. One morning, I came downstairs wearing one of her old cardigans, something I had borrowed from her closet when she wasn't looking. It draped loosely over me, the sleeves a little too long, but it made me feel safe. She glanced at me, then smiled, not in a mocking way but in one of those warm, knowing ways only a mother can. "Keep it," she said gently. Froze. "What?" "That sweater. It looks more right on you than it ever did on me." It was such a small gesture, but in that moment, I felt seen in a way I never had before. My chest tightened with gratitude, and I mumbled a quiet thank you, while hugging it closer to my body. As the weeks passed, the changes became more noticeable, not just to me but to everyone. My skin grew softer, my body reshaped itself in ways that felt both miraculous and terrifying. My voice didn't change much, but the way I carried myself did. I noticed my reflection in the mirror shifting, inch by inch, toward the person I always dreamed I could be. And while each small change thrilled me, they also reminded me how exposed I was becoming. The first time I dared to step out in public with even a hint of femininity was a turning point. I wore jeans that were just a little too fitted, a simple blouse I had bought in secret, and my hair brushed differently than usual. To most people it might not have looked dramatic, but to me it was everything. I remember walking into a small cafe with my heart pounding so loudly I thought the walls might echo it back at me. I expected stares, whispers, judgment. And yes, there were a few lingering glances, a couple of puzzled expressions. But there was also something else, something I didn't expect. The barista, a girl around my age, didn't blink. She just smiled at me and asked for my order, calling me Miss without hesitation. That single word unraveled me inside. For the rest of the day, I replayed it in my mind like a song I couldn't stop listening to. At home, I told my mom about it, my excitement spilling out like a child's. She listened, her eyes glistening, and then said, "See? The world is already beginning to see what I see." But alongside the highs came the lows. Not everyone reacted with the same ease. Some family members noticed my softer features, my new clothes, the way my mannerisms had shifted. Questions were asked in hushed tones. One uncle made a cruel joke at dinner, and though my mother shut him down with a sharp glare, I could still feel the sting of it. That night, I cried in my room, wondering if I had made a mistake. The weight of disapproval pressed heavily on me, and for a moment I wanted to retreat, to hide again, to bury this part of me back in silence. But when my mother knocked on my door and sat beside me, she took my hand and whispered, "Don't let their fear steal your truth. You're braver than that." Her words steadied me. Slowly, I began to realize that transformation wasn't only about my body, it was about my resilience. Each tear I shed, each cruel word I endured, was part of a process of becoming stronger, of owning myself fully. Then came the day my mother called me her daughter for the very first time in front of someone else. It was at the grocery store of all places. We ran into one of her friends, a woman I hadn't seen since childhood. She looked at me, squinting as though she recognized me but couldn't quite place it. "And who's this?" she asked. My stomach twisted. I braced myself for the awkward explanation, the half-truths, the look of confusion. But my mother didn't hesitate. She placed a hand on my shoulder and said with steady confidence, "This is my daughter." The word echoed in my ears like a bell. My chest swelled, my throat tightened, and I nearly broke down right there in the aisle. To hear her say it so casually, so proudly, it was the validation I didn't even know I was craving. Later, when we got home, I asked her, my voice trembling, "Did you mean that?" She looked at me, puzzled. "Of course I did. You are my daughter." And that was when I realized, this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about us. It was about a mother who chose to embrace her child, no matter what form that child took. But the journey was far from over. With each step forward, I uncovered not only new layers of myself, but also the weight of expectations, the struggles of being seen, and the haunting question of how far I was willing to go to live my truth. And as the months passed, the world outside grew louder, forcing me to confront the one fear I hadn't yet faced. What would happen when the rest of my family, and eventually everyone else, finally saw me the way my mother did? The day my mother called me her daughter in public changed everything inside me. It gave me courage, but it also planted a seed of fear, because if she could say it so easily, what would happen when the rest of the family or the outside world heard it too? I knew acceptance from her was rare, a gift not everyone would give. And I wasn't sure I was ready for the storm that might follow. First, I thought I could keep things quiet. I told myself I would just exist softly, blend in, let the changes unfold without drawing too much attention. But the mirror betrayed me every day. My reflection growing softer, my features changing, the way my clothes fit, the way my voice carried a new lilt. I couldn't hide forever. Sooner or later, someone was going to notice. That someone was my grandmother. She had always been sharp-eyed, the kind of woman who could read you without you saying a word. The first time she visited after months of not seeing me, her eyes narrowed as soon as I entered the room. "You look different," she said, her tone neutral but her gaze piercing. My heart stopped. I glanced at my mom, silently begging her to intervene. She did. "Different is good," Mom said firmly. "She's growing into herself." The word hung in the air, she. My grandmother's lips parted slightly, as if she had heard a language she didn't understand. She looked at me for a long time, her eyes flicking between my softened face, my clothes, and my mother's steady expression. I thought she would argue. I thought she would be cruel. But instead, she simply nodded once and said, "Well, I suppose every child grows differently." Then she sipped her tea, as if the conversation were finished. It wasn't full acceptance, but it wasn't rejection either. It was a start. Still, not everyone reacted with that kind of quiet grace. My cousins, when they found out, weren't as gentle. They laughed, made jokes, whispered behind my back. The sting of their words cut deep, especially because they came from people I had grown up with. It made me question myself all over again. Was I strong enough to live like this? Was I ready for the weight of people's opinions pressing against me every day? On nights when doubt consumed me, I would sit in front of my mirror, staring at my reflection. I would trace the curve of my cheeks, the subtle changes in my body, and I would whisper to myself, "This is who you are. Don't let them take it from you." But some nights, the whispers weren't enough. One evening, I broke down in front of my mother. Tears streamed down my face as I confessed everything. The fear of rejection, the cruel jokes, the shame that still lingered inside me. I expected her to comfort me with the same gentle words she always did. But that night she surprised me. "Listen to me," she said firmly, gripping my hands. "The world will always try to box you in, to tell you who you are allowed to be. But you don't live for them. You live for you. And if they can't see your worth, that's their blindness, not yours. Do you understand?" Her voice cracked at the end, but her eyes never wavered. I nodded, too choked up to speak, but inside something shifted. Her strength gave me strength. It was around that time that I started experimenting more openly with my appearance. I learned how to do my makeup, shaky hands holding brushes and pencils as I followed tutorials late at night. My first attempts were messy, uneven, laughable even, but they were mine. Each line of eyeliner, each shade of lipstick was a declaration, a tiny rebellion against the world that told me I shouldn't exist like this. The first time I stepped out of the house wearing makeup, I thought I would collapse from nerves. My hands shook, my heart raced, and every step felt like walking through fire. But when I came home later that day, flushed and breathless, my mother took one look at me and smiled proudly. "You're glowing," she said. I wanted to believe her. And maybe in that moment I did. But transformation isn't a straight path. With every step forward came moments of doubt. Some days I looked in the mirror and saw progress, beauty, hope. Other days I saw flaws, mistakes, a body that still felt like it was fighting me. The war inside my head was constant, and though estrogen was reshaping me, it couldn't silence the inner critic that had lived with me for so long. One night, when I was struggling more than usual, Mom sat beside me and shared something I never expected. "When I was your age," she began softly, "I struggled with who I was too. Not the same way as you, but enough to understand what it feels like to not fit into the mold people expect. I want you to know, I'm proud of you. You're braver than I ever was." Her words lit a fire in me. To hear that from her, to know she not only accepted me but admired me, made the pain feel lighter. Still, the outside world wasn't as forgiving. Every outing was a gamble. Would I be seen for who I was, or would I be ridiculed for it? Each stranger's glance felt like a test, each whispered word a threat. And though my mother's love was a shield, I couldn't hide behind her forever. Because deep down I knew the truth. If I wanted to live as her daughter, I had to be strong enough to claim it, no matter who tried to deny me. And that strength would be tested in ways I never could have imagined. The testing ground came sooner than I expected. It was a family gathering, one of those large dinners where everyone showed up. Grandparents, cousins, uncles, aunts, even the neighbors sometimes dropped by. I had been dreading it for weeks, because unlike quiet visits from my grandmother or casual run-ins at the grocery store, this would be the first time I stepped into the full view of the people who had always known me one way and were about to see me in another. My mother insisted I shouldn't hide. "If you keep waiting for the perfect moment, it'll never come," she told me, brushing my hair back before we left. "Let them see you as you are now." Her confidence steadied me, but my heart still raced as we walked through the front door. The chatter quieted almost instantly. Dozens of eyes turned toward me, scanning me, questioning me, some even frowning in confusion. My hands trembled, but I forced myself to stand tall. The first voice to break the silence was my aunt's. "You look different," she said slowly, her tone carrying more weight than the words themselves. I swallowed hard, ready to shrink into myself, when my mother stepped in. "She's becoming who she really is," she said with such calm certainty that I almost believed her voice could hold up the walls themselves. "This is my daughter." The word rang out like a challenge. My cousins exchanged glances. My uncle shifted uncomfortably in his chair. And then, just like that, the questions began. "Daughter? What do you mean? When did this happen? Why would you encourage this?" It felt like being trapped in the center of a storm. Words were flying, confusion was heavy, and I wanted nothing more than to run out the door. But then, something unexpected happened. My grandmother, the same woman whose sharp gaze had once unsettled me, spoke up. "She looks happier than she's ever been," she said firmly, silencing the room. And that's all that should matter. The tension cracked, if only slightly. Some relatives still looked uncomfortable, some whispered under their breath, but others softened, their eyes shifting from confusion to cautious curiosity. I exhaled slowly, the weight on my chest lifting just enough for me to breathe again. That night when we got home, I collapsed into my bed, overwhelmed by everything. My mother sat beside me, brushing my hair back from my face like she used to when I was a child. "You were brave tonight," she said softly. "I didn't feel brave," I whispered. "Bravery doesn't always feel like bravery," she replied. "Sometimes it just feels like surviving. But you did it. And I'm proud of you." Her words lingered in my heart for days. Slowly, I began to realize that this transformation wasn't just about hormones, makeup, or clothes. It was about claiming space, about standing tall even when the ground beneath me shook. Still, the hardest part wasn't the stares or the questions. It was the doubt that crept in when I was alone. No matter how much progress I made, I still battled with the voice inside me that whispered, "What if you'll never be enough? What if you'll always be caught in between?" One evening, while I was staring at myself in the mirror, caught between admiration and doubt, my mother appeared in the doorway. "What do you see when you look at yourself?" she asked gently. I hesitated. Sometimes I see her. Sometimes I just see the old me. And sometimes, I don't know what I see at all. She walked over, placed her hands on my shoulders, and met my reflection with me. "I see my daughter. Always. Even when you don't." Her voice carried such conviction that it silenced the doubt, at least for a while. As months passed, the changes grew undeniable. My body reshaped itself in ways that felt miraculous. My face softened. My emotions found new depth. And slowly, the girl I always dreamed of became visible not just to me, but to the world around me. But with visibility came risk. For every smile I received in public, there was a glare. For every kind word, there was a cruel one. I learned to navigate both, but it wore on me, chipping away at the safety I once felt at home. Until one night, when everything almost fell apart. I was walking home late, dressed in an outfit that made me feel confident but also vulnerable under the streetlights. A group of strangers noticed me, their whispers sharp, their laughter cruel. My chest tightened, fear gripping me as their words echoed in the dark. I quickened my pace, my heart racing, until I finally reached home and collapsed into my mother's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. She held me tightly, whispering over and over, "You're safe now. You're safe." It was a reminder that no matter how harsh the world could be, I had a place where I belonged. And yet, as I clung to her, I knew something deep inside me. I couldn't hide behind her forever. If I was truly going to live as her daughter, I had to find strength not only in her love but in myself. That realization marked the beginning of a new chapter, one where the question wasn't whether I could survive the stares and whispers, but whether I could thrive in spite of them. The night I came home shaken from those cruel strangers became a turning point. I realized I couldn't spend my life flinching every time someone stared too long or whispered too loudly. My transformation was never going to be hidden. It was written into every detail of my body, every choice I made, every step I took. And if the world wanted to question me, then maybe it was time I learned how to answer without apology. The next morning I told my mother I wanted to shop for clothes. Real clothes, not borrowed cardigans or secret blouses hidden under my bed, but outfits that were mine, chosen for the person I truly was. She didn't hesitate. "Then let's go," she said with a smile, grabbing her keys. We spent hours wandering through racks of dresses, skirts, blouses, and shoes. At first I was nervous, afraid of the stares, afraid of the judgmental smirks. But my mother walked beside me confidently, as if daring anyone to question us. Her presence gave me courage. For the first time I let myself try on what I wanted, not what I thought I was supposed to wear. The first dress I slipped into was simple, a soft lavender fabric that clung gently to my frame. I stood in the fitting room staring at myself, my throat tightening. I had imagined moments like this for years, but nothing compared to actually living it. I opened the curtain nervously, and when my mother's eyes landed on me, she gasped softly. "You look beautiful," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Tears welled up in my eyes. For so long I had feared I would never be enough, never be seen the way I wanted. But in that moment, with her gaze filled with pride, I felt something new. I felt real. We left the store with bags full of clothes, each piece a small declaration of who I was becoming. That night I tried on every outfit again in front of my mirror, twirling, laughing, crying. It wasn't just about fabric or color. It was about permission, the permission to exist as myself without shame. But transformation is not only external. As the months passed, estrogen continued reshaping me in quiet, miraculous ways. My body softened, my emotions deepened, and I began to notice changes in the way people interacted with me. Some saw me clearly, treating me with kindness, even calling me Miss without hesitation. Others stumbled, confused or resistant. One day, at a family event, one of my younger cousins tugged at my hand and asked innocently, "Are you my cousin or my cousin's sister now?" His words were simple, but they struck me with unexpected tenderness. I knelt down, smiled, and said, "I'm still me, just happier." He nodded, satisfied with the answer, and ran off to play. It was such a pure moment, untouched by judgment, that it made me realize something important. Children accept the truth more easily than adults. It's grown-ups who complicate it. But not every moment was easy. At school, whispers followed me down the halls. Some classmates snickered, others stared openly. A few, braver than the rest, asked invasive questions. Each day felt like walking a tightrope, balancing between the courage to exist and the fear of being torn down. There were days I came home ready to collapse, my confidence shattered by cruelty. But my mother's voice always found a way to lift me. One evening, after a particularly hard day, she sat me down and said, "You don't need everyone's approval. You just need your own. The world will always have people who can't understand. But you have to decide, are you going to shrink for them, or are you going to grow for yourself?" Her words sank deep into me. That night I wrote them in my journal, underlined twice. Grow for yourself. And slowly I began to live by them. I started speaking up more, correcting people gently but firmly when they misnamed me. I began walking into rooms with my head a little higher, even if my knees still shook. I discovered strength in my vulnerability, a power in refusing to disappear. But the biggest shift came the day my mother introduced me to someone new. It was a neighbor she had met recently, a kind woman with warm eyes. When she brought me over, she said without hesitation, "This is my daughter." The word still made my chest tighten every time I heard it, but this time it was different. The neighbor smiled at me, no confusion, no hesitation, just a genuine welcome. And in that moment, I realized something life-changing. It wasn't just about my mother calling me her daughter anymore. It was about me calling myself her daughter. About claiming the title not as a gift handed to me, but as a truth I had always carried. That realization filled me with both courage and fear. Because if I was truly ready to call myself her daughter, then the last step was unavoidable, telling the world in my own voice, not just through quiet changes or someone else's introductions. I knew the time was coming when I would no longer be able to hide in the safety of my mother's love. I would have to stand on my own and say it clearly. I am her daughter, Umi. And the question that haunted me was simple. When that moment came, would I be strong enough to face it? The moment I had been dreading and waiting for arrived quietly, without fanfare, without warning. It wasn't at a family dinner or during some big public event. It happened in the most ordinary place. At school, in front of people who had known me for years, people who had called me by a name that no longer belonged to me. We were in class when the teacher asked me to present. My heart was already pounding from the anticipation of speaking in front of everyone, but when she called me by my old name, something inside me froze. The sound of it felt heavy, foreign, like it didn't fit my skin anymore. The whole room looked at me, waiting, and in that silence I knew I had two choices: let it slide or finally speak my truth. I took a deep breath. My voice shook, but I forced it out anyway. "Actually, my name is," I said, giving the name I had chosen for myself. "And I'm her daughter," I added softly, almost like an echo of my mother's words, though no one in that room understood the weight behind them. The silence was deafening. Some kids whispered. Few laughed. But there were also others who simply nodded, as if it wasn't such a strange thing after all. My teacher blinked, startled, but then corrected herself and used my chosen name. The lesson went on. It might have looked small to anyone else, but to me it was monumental. For the first time I had claimed myself out loud, not through someone else, not hidden in private moments, but openly without apology. When I got home, I told my mother what had happened. Her eyes widened, then filled with tears. She pulled me into her arms and whispered, "I'm so proud of you. You finally stepped into who you are." That night, I lay awake replaying the moment in my head. The fear, the stares, the whispers, they were all real. But so was the relief. For the first time, I felt like I had crossed a line I could never uncross. And I didn't want to. The following weeks were a whirlwind. Some people resisted, some mocked, some ignored me altogether. But others surprised me. Friends who stood by me, teachers who corrected themselves without hesitation, strangers who smiled at me with recognition instead of confusion. My body continued changing, each day bringing me closer to the person I had always known inside. My reflection no longer felt like a stranger, it felt like home. And every time my mother called me her daughter, whether in public or private, I felt it resonate deeper, not as a label she gave me, but as the truth I had finally accepted for myself. But perhaps the most emotional moment came one evening when I was helping my mother cook. We were chopping vegetables, laughing about something silly, when she suddenly grew quiet. I looked at her, puzzled, and saw tears in her eyes. "You know," she said softly, "when you were little, I used to imagine what it would be like to have a daughter. I never thought that dream would come true. And now, here you are." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I dropped the knife, wrapped my arms around her, and whispered, "I've always been here. I just needed time to find myself." We stood there for a long time, holding each other, and in that moment I felt the full circle of my journey. From secret pills in my hand to my mother's proud declaration, from cruel stares to kind smiles, from doubt to truth, I had become not just her daughter, but my own person. Of course, life wasn't perfect. Never would be. There would always be challenges, always people who didn't understand, always days when doubt whispered too loudly. But now I had something stronger than fear. I had acceptance, not just from my mother but from myself. And that, more than anything, was what set me free. So when I look back at where it all began, the trembling hands, the quiet secret of swallowing estrogen for the first time, I realize it wasn't just about changing my body. It was about stepping into the life I was meant to live. It was about love, resilience, and courage. And most of all, it was about hearing my mother's voice, steady and certain, calling me the word that still makes my heart swell every single time. My daughter. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to our channel.